Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm glad you're joining us for our dialogue on the business imperative of safe and seen cultures. I think this is a really, really important topic, and I'm looking forward to having a dialogue with you today. For those of you who are maybe not new to a dialogue with us here at Cylient, it's really about contributing your thoughts and ideas and joining into the conversation. So I really appreciate it if you stay on camera, if at all possible, so it feels a little more like we're connecting and chatting with each other. You are welcome to ask questions as we go along, and I'm going to ask you questions as we go along so that we are discovering some things together. So I really hope that you will participate fully because it makes it a fantastic experience for all of us. So this is a really, really important conversation about how we create safe and seen cultures. And of course, the first question we need to answer is like, what is a safe and seen culture? And I could give you my ideas, but it'd be much more interesting, I think, to actually discover this for ourselves. So the first question I'm going to ask you to dig in with is, what keeps you from contributing the very best that you have to offer at work? What's going on? Why don't you put your best ideas out there? Challenge things when you know something's kind of off. Like, what is it that keeps you from showing the world what you've got to offer? I'd love to hear a few ideas. Because this is the essence of the issue, right? These are the things that indeed we are missing in our organizations. And we're going to talk a little bit more about why it matters that we don't get these kinds of contributions. But I'd love to hear from a few of you. What keeps you from contributing the very, very best that you have to offer? I know for myself, sometimes I feel like I might be judged. I feel like if I put an idea out there, maybe it's a little bit crazy that people might have a bad opinion of me. Yep, thank you. Yeah, Emily agrees with me. She also has a fear of being judged. I know also I feel like I might damage my ability to be seen as viable in other situations. You know, will I be valued by others? JP is saying my organization is experiencing ongoing displacements. Yeah, rock the boat, you could get the axe, right? You don't want to be seen. In fact, for a lot of us, safety feels like going undercover, right? It's like not sticking out. But here's the thing. We're going to talk in just a minute about why it is so, so important, actually, that we get some diverse thinking and that people will take the risk to stick out. But let me ask you this then. Let's pretend, and this may be really hard to imagine, but just pretend for a moment that in your organization, people absolutely saw and really valued you for who you actually are, and you felt invited to put out there what your greatest ideas are, or the possibilities that you have in your heart and mind. What would you contribute? Like, what would be different if you lived in a world that looked and felt like that? What would happen if not just you, but all your colleagues felt like that? Like, what do you think would actually happen? I'd love to hear your thoughts about that. Because here's my observation. I know personally when I have been in places where I have felt safe and seen, the ability to connect with other really great thinkers and imagine different possibilities has just been crackling with energy. In fact, that's what Julie's pointing towards. She's like, it'd be amazing, we'd be energizing, we'd be motivated, we'd feel free. I put energy towards the value instead of trying to fit in and please. Yeah, I think we would also take on a lot bigger questions. And I think we would dare to address much more significant issues if we felt like we were in a safe container where, and again, it's not like a yes place. It's not like, when I'm not talking about a marshmallow world where everything's always right and, we're always happy. I mean, it gets messy, right? When we get creative, but it's also where new things are birthed and come to life. And rather than talking about how to create this kind of culture, what I would like to do for a moment is talk about why it really matters from a business perspective. So, because here's the thing. The first question we've got to ask ourselves is, why don't people feel safe? Why are we all hiding and trying to fit in and feeling like we're not making waves? And I would tell you that this is just a relic of a very old worldview about what it means to be an effective leader. If you think about it, most of our current business practices really originated, in some cases, almost hundreds of years ago, where first of all, we needed to make assembly lines work. So we needed to take craftspeople and plunk them into situations where they just had to do the same thing constantly all the time, because our business competitive advantage came from consistency and replication. That's how we made money, right? Was being efficient. And then that grew into, organizations and larger businesses at scale. But before the internet, the only way that we could keep everybody focused and organized and doing what we wanted them to do was actually to tell them what that thing was, and then make sure we used our leadership skills to keep them in compliance with that activity. And that made sense in a stable world where the strategies that we chose, could be executed over 5 or even 10 years. Imagine that used to be our horizon, and where it was really hard to communicate with each other. And we knew who our competitors were. So developing business practices that basically imagined people as being kind of like cogs. We've heard this before, in a machine, in a wheel that kind of moves forward, made good sense. The challenge is we've kind of kept that mindset, but of course now we live in a very, very different world. All right, we live in a world of high complexity where it's easy to communicate with each other. And increasingly, our challenges are becoming much, much larger and much more complex. And I think that 2020 was kind of a wake-up call to just how complex our world has become, right? And so what I want you to do is just think for a moment. So step back and kind of take a more strategic look at your business and at the world. And I'm asking you to consider, what do you think are maybe the top 2 or 3 most important strategic questions that businesses need to ask and answer right now in order to be prepared to thrive in the world that we are moving into? Because I think you could look at 2020 in some ways as a breakpoint. I mean, it was the first time we've had a complete global crisis. There were huge issues that got raised that have been around for a very, very long time, by the way, but they came onto the fore in a way that we maybe have not experienced them before. So if you were to think about strategic imperatives, both for your business and just broadly speaking, what would you say that they were? I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Well, Diana, this is David Cambrone. I think from a service or product standpoint, its risk appetite is something that's top of mind for our organization. As we've had to really think about our business models, making sure that we're ahead of the curve as our economy will undoubtedly start to turn around as the vaccinations start to increase across the country and the globe. And then from an employee standpoint, I think it's how do we engage an employee base that's been through what we've been through,
Mhm.
start to think about a hybrid model of work. I think some of us will probably never go back to the office in the same way that we knew pre-pandemic, and some of us will go in some new type of configuration.
Right.
As an example, our organization is probably doing away with any type of residential desk or office, and you'll, again, because that's an antiquated model based upon what we've experienced over the last 12 months. So a
Right.
lot of, I think, opportunities and concerns associated with employee engagement just with that new type of model.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, all of these questions about how has the pandemic impacted your business? Not only just how do we respond to these kinds of questions that David is raising, like, what's work going to look like? What is it we need to focus on? But there's also some bigger questions, I think, that also got asked or got raised by the pandemic, which are things like, okay, so maybe your supply chain got completely disrupted by what happened. How do you prepare for what's going to happen next? By the way, climate change is actually a thing. It's happening. It's going to happen. How's that going to impact your business? What are your customers going to be thinking about and asking for? What do we do? When people start migrating, we're already seeing this. People are already migrating because of crises. We're seeing it at our border here. It's just the questions that we are needing to ask and answer, even around race, equality. These are all highly complex questions. And this is what I'd like for you to notice is if you think about these questions, what do they all have in common? They are highly complex. All right. They require people from different areas of focus, with different expertise, with different perspectives to actually come together and have really meaningful conversations that challenge our very assumptions and beliefs about how we do business, who we are, and what even the world is going to look like. If you think back to 2019, if we'd said, oh, by the way, there's going to be a global pandemic and none of you are going to go to work and you're all going to be wearing masks, people would have said, what? It was unimaginable. But by the way, not unanticipated. I mean, it wasn't like this dropped out of the sky. We knew, we knew this was a possibility. The Gates Foundation had been talking about it. There was planning for it, but we didn't get our heads around it. Why? I think one of the reasons we didn't ask and answer that question for ourselves was we lacked the capability to figure out how to actually sit down and have these conversations with each other. How do we actually get together and make these kinds of plans? I think, fundamentally lack the skills and the understanding of how important it is to have these conversations. Personally, I believe that 2020 was a wake-up call. And there are some huge issues that are coming down the pike that we are going to need to have to address. And these are just some of them that we're raising right now. Are, I think, all relevant. And I think each business is going to have to stop and really step back and ask itself, what are these big, maybe 3 top strategic questions that we need to ask and answer? Is it going to be how to create cultures that people actually want to come and contribute to our organization? It's so the point is just that what we need to be preparing for and actually organizing around are how do we prepare our people to have really excellent, multifaceted conversations about that allow us to address these significant issues in a meaningful way. Because personally, I think the next thing that comes could be even bigger than what we've just anticipated. Because absolutely, for sure, there will be more crises coming. The way we responded to this one has actually probably set us up for some more. And so I think what we need to really talk about now is how is it that we're going to prepare our people and our organizations to be in these conversations? And that, I think, is where the safe and seen culture comes in. And so I think a real question that we've got to ask ourselves is what keeps our people from feeling safe and feeling seen in these organizations? And by the way, I think one of our top conversations needs to begin with our senior leaders. I think one of the greatest things that are challenges that I hear and see is how difficult it is often for our very, very senior leaders to actually say what is truly on their minds, to be able to engage with their peers in a really authentic and meaningful way, and to create the space and the time to step back and really reflect on what are these bigger conversations that we need to have? How do we have them with each other? And how do we prepare our organizations to do that? But I think that's the absolute thing that really, really has to happen right now. So let's just talk about that for just a moment. I know I'm at a pretty strategic level right now today, and I know some of you like to kind of get down into the how of it. But the reason that I'm asking these questions right now is because if our most senior leaders do not understand what is at stake if we do not actually revolutionize how people are able to talk with each other, we are not going to be able to address these really big, highly complex issues that are most certainly coming our way. So, we've talked a little bit in our last dialogue about the age of collective creativity. And we talked a little bit about why that's so important right now. And it's because of these kinds of issues that we're pointing towards. And so here's the thing, I think that our first act of collective creativity is actually going to be asking and answering this question. How do we create cultures where actually we can be creative together and creative around addressing these really, really big issues? And so it's really interesting, I think, is how the question and the answer is actually nestled together. Because I think that actually exploring how we create cultures where this can happen is actually going to help us to answer that question. So here's some things that I would propose that we think about doing. The first one, well, the first thing I'd like to actually say is that I think that even though these issues are big and complex, they're going to get asked and answered by business. Because I don't think that we have any other place that we can go where strategic global change is possible. There's no global governance that's going to be able to do this. There's really no other way to create significant change, both for our companies and at scale, without asking businesses to fundamentally change how they think about who and what they are and how they are doing what they're doing. So the first thing I think that we need to do is actually help our senior leaders engage in conversations about this and really understand that until we fundamentally can have conversations about complex issues on an ongoing basis in a productive way, we're not going to be able to address these things. I think the other thing we need to look at is the fact that this is not just a people issue, right? This is not just a L&D, go train people. This is bigger than that. I think the answer for us in terms of how we create cultures where people can really create together brings together the confluence of technology and innovation. It brings together people and it brings together our willingness to actually challenge some of the assumptions and beliefs that we have about how we work. And we've got to figure out how we actually are able to set up places where all of these things can come together and focus on single issues or single complex issues to move them forward. So the first one, helping our business people understand that it matters. Two is bringing together the right resources and creating the right projects and structures around this so that we can actually tackle these things in a more comprehensive way. I think this is the only way that we're actually going to get behavior change at scale. And I would personally tell you that I think that is our greatest business challenge right now, which is how do we help people actually change how they interact with each other at scale. And I think the fastest way to do this is take one of these really complicated questions. It might be, how do we create a more equitable and just culture for our organization? Or it might be, how do we look at the impact of climate change on all of our systems and how that's going to impact us and who we need to be? Every organization could really do its own reflection and come up with its own really compelling question that people actually really agree matters, and couple that with the ability to help people engage in that conversation. So build the skills, help people learn how to have conversation together, and bring this big strategic question with this big intention to build our skills to create together and actually build a change management project around that, so that we are in a place where we can actually learn what we need to learn, to iterate, to play, until we discover what it takes for us to really be able to be in effective conversation together with each other. I know that might sound like a lot, might sound a little far-fetched, but if we don't reinvent ourselves, we'll just go through the next thing and get, beat up one more time. And, and then maybe we'll be ready to pay attention. I'll tell you the thing that personally concerns me the most is that I think some of the things that we've done to address the pandemic, we can't do again. I just learned actually yesterday that we increased our monetary supply here in the United States by 22% in the last year. How many times can we do that? Not too many. We have to get better at doing this at scale. I think now is the time to really ask some big, important questions, and actually really fundamentally look at how we are as human beings. Because our ability to talk and connect together is the big missing piece on everything. Doesn't matter what you look underneath of everything, and any of these major issues, if you look at what is at the very root of it, the fundamental thing you will see is that as human beings, we have not evolved the skill to be in meaningful conversation together and to create something new at scale. We just don't have it. And that, I think, is what we absolutely must learn now. So let me open up. I know that's a little higher level than what I usually play at, but just watching everything that's going on in the world, I think this is just so important. Any questions, comments about that? Before I'll take us to some questions that people sent in, but I was just curious about your reaction or thoughts to what I'm sharing. And feel free to come off mic. We are a small group today, so if you want to come off mic and ask me a question, or on mic, I should say, feel free.
Diana, that whole idea of we don't have the skill to have meaningful conversation. Of course, you know me, that's a near and dear to my heart as a subject. So, from an opinion standpoint, do you think we ever had it? Or do you think, do you think we're sort of staying flatlined in terms of our inability or ability to have meaningful conversation, or is it getting worse?
Well, I think we've been able to avoid it because we weren't so connected. When we lived in little places where you knew everybody, I grew up in a town where I knew everybody and they all were kind of like me. And then, I got to university and I met a few other people and I could kind of, but we've never been so connected before. And I think the technological innovations that we have experienced over the last couple of decades have just rewired everything, literally. And we haven't caught up. I think human beings have not caught up with the level of innovation that we have created. And it's not, so now the confluence is we have the earth, we have human beings, we have all this interconnectivity, and we have got to find a way to be in a sustainable and sustaining balance with each other. The thing that scares me the most is how many systems that we have right now that are just teetering on some kind of shift into a space we don't know whether it is, so it's time. I mean, I think are being called to up level as human beings to what we have created around us, and to align much more meaningfully and much more sustainably with the earth we all share.
I get very concerned about inclusion. I think we've all heard the phrase, it's who you know. And I feel like at some point over the last 12 months, that shifted from who knows you. And I think the working from home has certainly increased email, it's increased meetings, but it's increased disconnect, and it's increased isolation, it's increased how do I get to the table? How do I get to be seen by people that might be able to advocate for me or support me in your path or my personal path? So, just who gets invited into the room to even have those meaningful conversations, I feel like has increased as an area of concern in my world.
Thank you. Yeah, for sharing that. And in a way, that's why I actually think, well, one, I think there's things we can do at every level around this. But I also think it is one of the reasons why the next dialogue I want to have is how to make it safe for senior leaders to change. Because I think we need to actually start to make it so that's the question, is like, how do we make it safe to change? But also, how do we be seen? And so I think I'm going to thank you for that. I'm going to shift to a few questions that we got. I'm going to answer just a few of them, but one of them is quite related to what you just shared, David. And I don't give the names of the people who ask these, so that allows people to ask sometimes a little edgier questions if they're not going to get called out. So somebody asked what to do if they felt invisible. And I think a little bit of what you're pointing towards is feeling invisible. So I thought I would just take a moment to talk about the paradox of safety. The paradox of safety is we feel safe if we are not being seen by people, if we meld in, if we look like everybody else, and, but then we feel very alone. And we feel like the world doesn't see us because we actually don't let the world see us. And what I will tell you, what I have discovered in my own life was when it was actually that I took risks to be seen, that things have changed. In fact, maybe I'll tell you a quick little story since we have a moment. When I was going through my first year of MBA, I had almost no business background. I had just come out of training to be a professional dancer. And there I was sitting with all these business people. And I did my best to try to fit in and look like I knew what I was talking about. And this failed really, really miserably for me. It got so bad, actually, that by Christmas time, I got a note from the school that said, Diana, if you do not get your marks up, it's kind of questionable whether we're going to be seeing you at the end of the year. This had never happened to me in my entire life. But I was trying so hard to fit in. Nobody knew what I was about. So I went home and I'm like, okay, Diana, you have everything you have in the world invested in this MBA. I'm like, I have to quit. I can't do this. I'm failing. I have never experienced this. And I literally actually decided I was quitting, at which point I literally heard a voice in my head go, fantastic. Why don't you just show up and actually be you? And I'm like, well, what have I got to lose? So I literally went back into the MBA the next day and I just started saying what I believed. Someone asked a question about winning and losing. I'm like, let me tell you about winning and losing. And I just put out there a very different way of thinking about things. And all of a sudden, the world changed for me. People started to connect with me. They started to want to hear what I had to say. I got invited to, work with other groups. My marks started to go up. I actually graduated at the top quartile. But everything changed when I decided to take the risk and let the world see me. And the people that I most wanted to connect with started to find me. They never would have found me if I continued to hide behind my little nameplate and try to answer the question in the right way. So while you need to be thoughtful about this, I will tell you there are tons of other people looking for you. They're looking for the light that you have, but you're going to have to risk showing your light if you want them to find you. So I really suggest that all of you take responsibility for the light that you are and that you find ways to shine it. I mean, don't like go from I'm not on to, like now I am like, a spotlight. But find what are safe ways that you can shine your light? Can you offer an idea? Can you create a connection? Can you form a group of like who else is thinking about this question? Do we want to get together and talk about it? Find ways not to be invisible because there are others like you out there. Whatever like you means, you are not alone, but you've got to turn your light on if you want them to find you. So it is a creative challenge for you to figure out how to do that. That's what I would say. Let's see, there was another question in here about organizations that employ diversity in networks. So this kind of leads naturally into this next piece. And the question is, are they helpful or useful? I would tell you that I think that they are actually. I know personally that, as a woman in the MBA and business and all kinds of things, I have been a minority in that way. And actually connecting with other people that are in a similar kind of situation has been helpful to have conversations about how to navigate, sometimes landscapes that feel weird or foreign or challenging or not safe. I think the question with those networks is, are you looking back or are you looking forward? The ones that have been most valuable for me are not the ones that turn into kind of complaining about what is, but the ones that support each other to ask, what if? What else? How do we connect? How do we make an impact? How do we get heard? So, yes, get together with other people that feel like you connect with them, but make sure that the question that you are asking addresses some of these bigger issues that we've been talking about today, which is, how do we have a voice? How do we have an impact? And think creatively. It's like, how can you reshape the system in a way that is positive for not only for you, but for everybody? And so I think the questions that we ask ourselves and we choose to answer are really, really important. And again, I think that's one of the skills that's involved with being able to have much more meaningful conversation is the ability to really discern what we at Cylient would call the knots, which is that place where something's not happening, but it's like, which ones are the biggest leverage points for change? I'll tell you as an executive coach, one of the first things that I listen for when I'm going to help someone go through a massive transformational change just personally is what are the core underlying assumptions or beliefs that are keeping most of the behaviors that they're engaging in that are limiting them in place? And how can I begin to work to help them consider another possibility? How can I help them see maybe that this command and control kind of approach to leadership that feels so safe for them is actually putting them at risk, and start to see that there's actually a very different way of leading that they could transition to that is not only going to be more effective, in the long term, it's going to be much safer. So look for those knots, those leverage points, those places where a small amount of change or a change in thinking is going to release the biggest amount of benefit, not only for you, but for others. So whether you're working individually, whether you're getting two people together in networks, really focus on those core questions. And I think that's where we get the biggest amount of change. The last question that I wanted to take a look at and just share with you around was there was a number of questions here, but people saying, well, who is doing this already? And all I can say is, I don't know of anybody, but I'm not the absolute expert. There's There may be people, there may be organizations that have this nailed, and I just am not aware of them. I don't research these things. What I could tell you is I've seen pockets of things. Mostly what I've heard of are places where research is coming together. So people from different disciplines that are actually coming together and looking at pretty complex questions. And I can't remember, I heard a podcast on one of these recently where people there were biologists and all these other folks that were coming together coupled with people who had the technology to do a lot of computation, and they were asking and answering some really big questions in some interesting ways. So I hear of pockets of it, and I think that's what's going to happen. I think we're going to experiment in different places and learn how to do these things. But here's the thing I would tell you about proof, and it speaks also to safety, is that if you need proof before you act, you're not going to be the first through the door. The door is open right now for us to create a very different world. But the people who are going to go through it first are the people who are willing to be in some uncomfortable questions, who are willing to play with ideas and have some work out and some not, and who are really willing to think very differently. And here's what I would offer you. Just recently, coincidentally, I have just gotten a really fast and not completely thorough education on Bitcoin. And I would put this out to you for consideration, that if you don't know too much about Bitcoin, so this is my, again, kind of very new understanding, but it really came into being because of an essay that was written by Satoshi Nakamoto. And nobody knows if that's a person or a collective of people, but this essay that proposed looking at our financial systems in a really, really different way and actually solving for some massive, huge problems that are just inherent in how we, manage money and all basically the system, the financial systems as they are. And not to get into it, but basically proposed a completely different way of thinking about currency and how to share currency. And the people in the beginning, some people read that and went, that's fascinating. Not like, I can prove that's going to work, but they actually did the work. So initially with Bitcoin, what happens is the first people are called miners, and they mine these blocks of BitChain. They become blockchains. So I'm not probably doing this particularly well, but they made a personal commitment of time and energy to the system to build it. This is the essence of what I would say. And over time, it has gone through a lot of different expressions, but I will tell you, in this day, there are people who are being paid in Bitcoin. You can actually go down and download some Bitcoin onto your phone today if you want. You can invest in Bitcoin. It's a thing. And it, I think, is going to become a more important thing. But it started as an idea on a piece of paper that some people put some energy into to bring into reality. I think that I think the same kind of completely different thinking that created Bitcoin is needed in how we think about who we are, how we interact together, and how we create together. And I think the people who are willing to kind of take that on as a question and play with it and discover what really works are the people who will invent the world that we are creating now. And I think they are the ones who will realize the strategic advantage that I believe is available in this exploration. And the people who need proof will be the people who will have to meet the standards that those people create as table stakes. But the folks who go through the door first, the people who can unlock this code and figure out how we as people, through conversation and the intersection of technology and process, are able to create together, are the people who will unlock a very different world. And I am very interested in being in that conversation. I hope that you are too, because we need it. And I think that we have just gone through an experience that was meant to wake us up, to ask and answer these questions. And I think that what's on the other side could be a really amazing and fantastic. So I hope you join me. I hope that you'll continue to play with these ideas. And I do hope you'll come back for some more dialogues, because we are going to talk about how to make it safe to change. And there are also some other questions on here on how to be a great kind of change agent. And I think that deserves just a whole dialogue of its own. So thanks so much for joining us today. I have enjoyed being in conversation with you and look forward to connecting with you again soon.